Catherine and Charles in several of them. Archie stood speaking earnestly to another man named Nigel Trehorn in one candid shot. Trehorn? As in the Trehorn building? I asked, and Billy confirmed it.
I believe it was this one's great-great-grandfather who built it. Could be one generation farther back, though.
He seemed to be embarrassed that he couldn't pinpoint it any closer than that. No problem. Your memory is amazing. My eyes went back to the article. So the Devons had Archie and his sales division to thank for a big financial coup, and yet Devon had fired Archie only a few weeks later. It seemed to give more credence to my theory that he'd found out about an affair. An obituary for Charles Devon informed me that he died before the construction on the mill addition was completed.
Mrs. Devon owns it now, you know,
Billy Williams said, setting some dusty old papers on the desk beside mine as an excuse to start up the conversation again. My expression must have been a little blank.
The Trehorn building. She has it now.
I tried to process what this might mean, but he went on talking.
Nigel,
he said with a gesture at the computer screen.
That one. Got himself into some kind of difficulties. Some say gambling. Mr. Devon loaned him the money that kept him out of bankruptcy. Took the building in return. He died, and she inherited.
Why was I bothering with the newspaper? This guy knew the players, the official stories, and the gossip. I pointed to a photo that had both Archie and Catherine in it. Was there ever anything between these two? He peered closely at the screen.
Some said so.
Could that have had anything to do with Archie Jones losing his job at the sugar mill? His head bobbed.
Some said.
I wished I could schedule a meeting with some and get all the info in one place. I wonder if Charles Devon knew about it. Although I'd merely been musing at that point, his head bobbed again. Seemed I could just play 20 questions with him and puzzle out the whole thing. With no way to separate his nods into fact or speculation, I turned back to the news archive. But my mind wouldn't settle well enough for reading. What if Archie and Catherine had been a long-term item and had cooked up a plan to get rid of both their spouses? Chapter 22. Okay, this was getting weird. If Archie Jones and Catherine Devon wanted to be together, wouldn't it have been far simpler just to ask for divorces? Unless Catherine was not about to forfeit her lifestyle, the estate, ownership in the sugar mill, and more to settle down with an unemployed man whose own wife would not go quietly into the shadows. In a case like that, it might have made perfect sense to first get rid of Charles Devon, wait a discreet amount of time, then get Dolly out of the picture too. I felt my eyes go wider at the very idea. Mr. Williams, this obituary on Charles Devon doesn't say how he died.
Oh, that bit about how donations should be made to the cancer fund. That's true. Lungs. Man smoked like a chimney and it caught up with him. After the diagnosis, it went quickly. There went my theory. But I didn't mean that the newly single Mrs. Devon wouldn't pressure Archie to free up his own life. And if Archie didn't have the balls to demand a divorce, maybe Catherine had ramped up the pressure and either convinced him to do away with Dolly, or she might have administered the pills herself. I chewed at my lip. This could add a whole new wrinkle. The type of influence she might exert over Archie puzzled me at first, but then it became crystal clear. If he got rid of Dolly, he could have a position at the sugar mill, something prestigious without a lot of hours, like chairman of the board or something. If he didn't do something about his nagging wife, Catherine could see to it that he remained unemployed and stuck with Dolly forever. Interesting concept. It didn't quite explain who had actually orchestrated the pranks against Dolly. Archie's presence precluded him setting up some of them. But still, I had to give this a little more thought. I thanked Billy Williams and left the news office. I was running out of time. My flight was early Saturday morning, so Louisa had offered to drive me back to London tomorrow afternoon, where we could have a nice dinner, see a show, stay in a hotel. It would give us some quality time to end the visit and keep us from having to get up in the middle of the night to make the 2-hour drive and catch the daybreak flight. Now that I had some clear suspects and motives,
I had very little time to act, and if I didn't come up with some hard proof, it was still back at square one in trying to convince the authorities the two leading citizens were murderers. Proof, proof, proof. The word thrummed in my head with every footstep. The only possible place the proof might exist would be in Dolly's apartment or shop, so I needed to go back there and see if I could find anything at all before Archie had completely cleared everything out. Way deep in my brain, I didn't really believe I would find anything. Surely Archie had dumped anything incriminating right away, but perpetrators don't always make the smartest moves in the heat of the moment. That's why all those dumb criminal stories exist. It was worth a try. When I turned onto Lilac Lane, I spotted a large truck outside the knit shop. Archie stood on the sidewalk talking to two men, one of whom was making notes on pages attached to a clipboard. Uh-oh, moving day. I edged past them and went inside. The shop's inventory was gone. Gabrielle was in the process of tying up a plastic garbage bag. The display bins and shelving had been pushed to one side of the room, a yellow rope around the whole lot with a sheet of paper stapled to it. "Not to be moved" was written on the page in bold black marker. The sales room had a hollow feeling. On the way over, I'd cooked up my story, and I tested it now on Gabrielle. "The last time I was in the apartment with Dolly, I left something behind. Would it be all right if I—" She waved me toward the stock room and the stairs. Now if I could just do a quick recon before Archie went up there. Even if he appeared, I would use the same story, although it might be a little harder to bluff my way along with him. For the moment, I knew I didn't have much time, so I dashed up the stairs and into the unlocked apartment. What specifically would help make my case? I slipped into the bedroom. Dolly's pill bottles might have helped, but there was no sign of them. It was likely the coroner had taken them. I pulled open the nightstand drawers in case. No bottles. The drawer on the right side of the bed contained a pair of masculine-styled reading glasses, a tube of athlete's foot cream, a cell phone charging cord, and an issue of a business magazine. I hurried to the other side of the bed. Dolly's nightstand seemed no more helpful. Hand lotion, a black sleep mask, a tube of lip balm, 2 hairpins, and one of those clip-on reading lights for a book. I tugged the drawer a little farther open. A spiral-bound book with a cloth cover rested behind the other items. A journal? I grabbed it up and stuffed it inside my jacket. The floor of the closet contained ranks of shoes neatly lined up, his and hers. I scanned through his, but there was not one pair with treads like the ones that had made the muddy footprints in the shop. I gave the rest of the closet a quick glance, then hurried to the kitchen. A tiny closet held cleaning supplies and brooms. It might be the logical spot for dirty boots to be tossed, but none were visible. I closed the door softly and glanced around the kitchen. Dolly's rose-patterned cups and saucers were stacked in cupboards with glass doors. I counted 6 saucers and 5 cups, explained by the fact that she'd broken the one when she burned her hand. As I looked around, I spotted the pieces lying in a tidy pile at one side of the worktop. It must have been too hard for Dolly to simply throw them in the trash, and maybe she hoped to have it repaired. Still, nothing unexplainable, nothing I didn't already know. On the far wall hung a telephone and wired to it an answering machine. Without a thought, I pressed a button which opened the compartment where the miniature cassette tape kept the messages. I plucked out the tape, dropped it into my pocket, and closed the little door on the machine before I could talk myself out of it. Bad girl, Charlie. Male voices grew louder downstairs, probably Archie and the moving men. They could come up here at any moment. Back in the living room, I scanned the visible surfaces, wishing like hell that I'd thought of doing this search earlier in the week, when I might have had more time. A magazine rack beside the sofa had a variety of discards, and I picked through them and chose a black-covered calendar book, the kind insurance company sent out. Flipping through, I saw that no one had ever used it. This would be the item I'd left behind, if Archie came walking through the door and caught me here. Think, Charlie. I stared around the room, heart beating too fast, thoughts not clicking effectively. On the same wall where the door opened to the stairs into the shop, I spotted another door, one with heavy panels and 2 locks. I twisted the deadbolt knob. As I'd guessed, it opened onto a tiny landing and stairs went straight down to the street. At the bottom there were 3 small transom windows above the outer door, which had a mail slot in it. This was the door that Dolly said they never used. But someone had used it. At the base of the stairs I spotted a dark clump. I closed the living room door behind me and took the dimly lighted stairs slowly, hoping like crazy that nothing would squeak. The object took shape as I approached. A pair of man's boots, with mud on the soles. I may have just found the ghost's footwear. I lifted one and looked at the tread pattern. As nearly as I could remember, it looked like a match for the prints I'd seen that morning. The boot could very well be Archie's size. It was about the same as the shoes I'd seen upstairs in the closet. I set it carefully back in place, debating. Okay, so what did I really have here? Nothing I could turn over to the police. Archie would have a ready explanation. He came home, didn't realize how dirty his boots were until he walked partway across the shop, so he sat down and took them off, stashed them here so the wife wouldn't get mad, meant to come back and clean up the mess, but something interrupted. It was a reasonable scenario, one that would make him look rational and me look like a nutcase. I sat down on the bottom step and pulled out the little journal I'd taken from Dolly's nightstand. The woman appeared to be a very erratic journal keeper. At a glance, I could tell that 2/3 of the pages were pristine and new. Starting at the front, the first entry was dated more than 5 years ago. There were 2 or 3 entries in that time frame. I didn't bother to read them. A few pages on, the dates were 2 years ago. Thumbing to the end, I found 10 pages written within the last year, these beginning with Dolly's decision to open the knit shop. Although her handwriting wasn't easy to decipher, I found myself reading passages here and there. At the time she decided to open the shop, she'd met a lot of resistance from Archie. One entry said, "I simply had to put my foot down. We are doing this, I told him." An entry dated a few months later said, "It started up again. I know it. I'll find out who she is this time, not let it pass like I did 5 years ago." I turned back to the beginning of the diary. Sure enough, there were entries expressing Dolly's concern that Archie might be having an affair. He was out late. He traveled a lot. He was always in business meetings. But she didn't know who the woman might be. She demanded that he stay home. She planned trips for the 2 of them. She tried to orchestrate a social set for them outside of his co-workers. If only they'd had children, she lamented. Then Archie would be irrevocably bound to her. I scanned the 10 or more pages that went along in this vein, but the journal didn't yield much in the way of facts, just Dolly's thoughts on how to keep a rein on her husband. A large gap in time between entries. Things must have gone smoothly for quite a while. Maybe Archie had stopped seeing Catherine, or whomever, for a stretch of time. Then 2 years ago, Dolly began another crisis and started writing again. When this set of entries continued in the same vein as the previous, I began to scan. Would the woman just not let it go? She didn't offer up a shred of proof, only her inner demons seemed to fuel the thing. Of course, Archie probably really was having an affair. From Dolly's notes on the things she said to him and the way she treated him, who would blame him? I became impatient and turned to the last entry in the book, dated within the last month. After the mysterious incidents at the shop had begun happening, "Archie and his woman are at it again," she wrote. "This time they are trying to make me think I'm going crazy. Well, I'm not, and I'll not have this. If I have to chain him to the store to make him stay home, I'll do it." What? I paused and reread that last part. Clearly Dolly was not meekly accepting the idea that she was losing her mind, and nothing about that entry made her sound suicidal. This was a woman with a firm vision and a nutty plan for keeping her husband in line. I closed the journal and turned the book over in my hand. Did Archie know this existed? Surely not. I couldn't imagine him reading these entries and not confronting Dolly about it, or not destroying the book after her death. She hadn't gone to any extraordinary lengths to hide it, so my guess was that he simply never pried into her things. She either felt confident that he wouldn't find the journal, or she didn't care if he did. That might be a whole new wrinkle. Maybe she halfway hoped he would read the entries, and, learning how much she wanted him to remain married to her, would simply give up on any other plans. This was one psychologically messed up couple. Heavy footsteps sounded very nearby, and my heart rate flipped into triple time. The staircase from the shop to the apartment must be fairly close to the one on which I was sitting at the moment. In a few seconds, someone would be in the apartment, probably the men wanting to pack everything in readiness for the move. I gave a quick look upward at the door to the living room, decided against going back in, opened the door to the street, and ducked out. Chapter 23. The details of the journal, plus the cassette from the telephone answering machine, were burning holes in my pockets. I felt like I had vital clues here. I just didn't yet know what they were or how they all fit together. I got 2 blocks away and then pulled out the tape. It was of the micro variety, and I wasn't sure what type of machine would be required to play it, but I knew I didn't have one. Somewhere in this shopping district I'd seen an electronics store. I wandered nearly 8 blocks before I spotted it. A guy who could barely be out of high school sat behind the counter, earbuds plugged in, swaying to a beat that I could hear through his skull. I gave a wide wave of my arms to get his attention. I showed him the cassette, and he looked at it as if it were from another planet. "It's from an answering machine?" I said. "Wow, I thought those were all digital." "In the olden days," I said with a grin, "they use these." I didn't tell him that I'd come across one in my parents' attic that used small reel-to-reel tapes. That admission would place me in the age of dinosaurs for sure. "What I need to know is whether you have any kind of machine that can play this." He turned it over in his hands. "Yeah, I got it." I followed him to a display shelf of small tape recorders. Lo and behold, there was actually one, a rather dusty unit. I would buy it if I had to, but really, just to listen to what would amount to a very few minutes of messages that probably wouldn't mean anything to me anyway. "Could I demo this?" "Oh, sure." He opened the bag as if to be sure the recorder had batteries in it, placed some there, and inserted the small tape. He handed it to me and stood there. "Privately?" "Oh, right." He moved back over to the sales counter and plugged the earbuds back into his head. I rewound the tape a short way and hit play. A man's voice, unfamiliar to me. "Another few weeks. These things take time." Not enough info. I rewound the tape again, and it began to play in the middle of a message from someone telling Dolly that the book she'd ordered had come in. I let the tape continue to play. That same male voice came on. "Archie, Nigel Trehorn here. Sorry I don't have the answer you want, about the funds. It will be another few weeks. These things take time." Nigel Trehorn. I knew that name. It took a few seconds to click before I remembered that he was the attorney in the photos at the news office, the man whose family once owned Dolly's building. He'd been photographed talking to Archie at a social function, and now he was calling Archie about some money. The tape was blank after that. There was no date or time recorded with the message, so I had no way of knowing how recently Trehorn had called. I rewound the tape once more. 3 messages back, a woman offered condolences on Dolly's death and expressed regrets that she'd not made it to the funeral. That had to have come in after Monday, so all the messages after that were very recent. So what money would Archie be discussing with an attorney? An insurance policy, an inheritance, or tax issues were the first things that popped into my mind. I glanced toward the young clerk who sat with his back to me, bobbing to his own beat while he ran his dustcloth over merchandise that hung on the wall behind the counter. He may not have even remembered I was in the shop. I might as well learn all I could. I rewound the microtape to the beginning and played all the messages this time. They came from the days immediately after Dolly died, which made sense when I thought about it. In her efficient way, she'd probably cleared the tape every time she retrieved messages. Archie merely let them accumulate. The entire collection consisted of a total of 4 condolence calls, all from women, then the other one about Dolly's bookshop order and the one from the attorney. Clearly I'd exhausted any possible useful information I would get from it. I ejected the tape, pocketed it, then set the recorder back on the shelf. The clerk gave me a rhythmic nod to the beat of his own music when I stepped over to the door and mouthed thank you to him. Money changes a lot of things, and the realization that Archie was waiting to come into something could be a game changer. Catherine already had money. I couldn't see that Archie's money would make much difference to her, although his financial status might. If he could afford to move back to the nicer neighborhood, fit in again with her social set, well, that might make it more feasible for the two of them to really become a couple. On the other hand, why? If they'd continued their affair through the years when Archie lost his job and lived in the apartment above his wife's knitting shop, Catherine couldn't be all that hung up on his finances. I couldn't quite wrap my brain around all the nuances, but then it could just be that I'd skipped breakfast and that it was well past lunchtime and I needed fuel. Knowing this would be my last lunch in Barry, I couldn't resist. It was back to the Cornish pasty shop for another of those special treats. I carried the hot little pastry pocket of savory meat with me, picking at bits of the crust while I strolled the streets, mulling over the mountain of little facts I'd gathered about Dolly, Archie, her death, and his secret life. Although the details were numerous, I couldn't for the life of me piece together a murder out of it. In this day and age, people didn't risk a lifelong prison term because they were unhappy with their spouses. Well, okay, some did. But Archie didn't fit the mold. I got it that he had a hard time standing up to Dolly. Her own diary entries made it pretty clear that she was a heck of a determined woman. But the man had 2 legs. Wouldn't he have simply walked out the door if he was ready to end the marriage? Again, I came back to the money. Depending on what type of funds Nigel Trahorn had been talking about and how much it involved, that could very well be the piece of the puzzle that would make everything fall into place. I wondered how I would find out. Dolly might have had a large life insurance policy, or perhaps there was money in her name that Archie couldn't access until she died. But even if I had the name of the insurance company or the registration information for the bank account, what were the odds I could bluff my way in and learn the details? I realized that my little meal had vanished, and I was standing near one of the hanging flower baskets at the east end of Lilac Lane. Bluffing is something I do pretty well, so before I could talk myself out of it, I strode over to the storefront where a man was in the process of taking down the Knit and Pearls hanging sign. I sidestepped him and went inside. "How's it going?" I asked Archie, knowing at a glance that he was in a muddle again. He was alone in the shop, although I could hear voices of the movers down in the cellar. Archie's hands fluttered above a file box which he'd begun to fill with folders from the drawers of the work area.
"I sent Gabrielle out for some lunch, and she's not returned yet."
The phone rang just then, apparently someone who was coming to pick up the store fixtures and wanted to know if this was a convenient time. Archie said it would be best to allow another hour.
"They'll be wanting this counter and the desk,"
he mumbled. "Could you use some help? I'm pretty good with paperwork," I said with a nod toward the box. "I could gather those up, file them neatly. You can always go through them later on, once you get settled." He lost a little of the deer-in-headlights look. "Here, you pack the small items into this box. I'll get the files organized into this other one." I handed him a mid-sized cube of a carton and gestured toward the clutter of little office items, stapler, tape dispenser, and such. "It doesn't much matter if they're neatly stowed. Just fill the box and get one of the movers to take it away." He followed directions well, and I guessed it was from years of practice. Once a woman entered the room, Archie Jones just let her take over. A little weird, I thought, but in this case I planned to use it to my advantage. I pulled the banker's box up beside the 2 file drawers and took a seat in the chair beside them. Even though I pretended to work quickly, I managed to get a look at each of the descriptive tabs. Everything looked pretty standard for any small business. There were folders for paid invoices, accounting, customer contacts, and a series labeled with business names that appeared to be the suppliers of various inventory items. I came across one titled Insurance, which I discreetly slipped under the box. Archie filled the carton I'd handed him and muttered something about needing another one, went off to the stockroom. I slipped out the insurance folder and opened it, keeping one eye toward the doorway where Archie had gone. Unfortunately, the policy inside was to insure the contents of the shop, not Dolly's life. I filed it and continued. When Archie didn't immediately appear, I took a peek inside another folder labeled Bank Account. It, too, was strictly business. The neatly folded statements were all in the name of the shop, and the balance on the most recent one showed only about £100 in the account, Nothing else in either of the two drawers appeared to pertain to funds or money that might reasonably be the subject of the conversation with Archie's attorney. I quickly jammed the rest of the folders into boxes and placed them against the far wall, well out of the way. When Archie came back, I was standing there with a spare banker's box in my hand. "What about upstairs? I could box up any files you've got up there." His attention was drawn to a man in a work uniform who appeared in the doorway.
"We're here to disconnect the telephone," the man said.
Archie, clearly no multitasker, set down the carton he'd brought for the final office supplies and showed the man where the phone line came in. I pointed toward the ceiling, a questioning look on my face, and he waved me toward the stairs. That was pretty easy. I didn't wait for further instructions. With permission to enter the apartment and carte blanche on any files I might find up there, I scoped out the place. The living room was pretty well filled to capacity with a sofa, 2 fat armchairs, a TV set and stand, and a coffee table that was way too large for the confined space. Clearly all their furnishings had been purchased for larger quarters. I didn't remember anything in the kitchen or bath that could remotely contain what I was looking for, and the only other choice I had was the bedroom. I'd not paid a lot of attention on my previous visit, but now I noticed 2 good-sized boxes on a top closet shelf. I pulled them down. One was filled to capacity with photographs and personal letters, the family memorabilia that collects in the 20-plus years that Archie and Dolly must have been together. I ran my hands through the packets of prints without opening them. The envelopes appeared to contain greeting cards with a few personal letters tossed in. All were handwritten, many on pastel stationery. I turned to the other box. This was more like it. There were folders with income tax information. The forms were unfamiliar to me, but the general gist of declaring one's income to the government and paying a portion of it remains the same just about everywhere, I suppose. The only remarkable thing was that the amount of income on the most recent form, after Archie's forced retirement, was dramatically less. I could see how the couple might have struggled with the change in lifestyle and finances. Another folder contained 2 insurance policies. I glanced at the door to be sure no one had sneaked up on me before opening them. The policy on Archie's life had a payout that equaled about 3 years of his former income. The one on Dolly was for much less, only about £10,000. It certainly wouldn't make Archie wealthy enough to risk a prison sentence in return. At the very bottom of the stack was a large brown envelope. I pulled it out. The printed return address showed that it came from a law firm in London. It had been mailed to Dolly Hempstead Jones. Another quick peek toward the door while I bent the metal brad upward to open it. A document of about 20 pages came out, accompanied by a single-sheet letter on law firm stationery. Dear Mrs. Jones, pursuant to our telephone conversation on this date, enclosed please find your father's trust documents. As per the provisions of the trust, the entirety of Brian Hempstead's estate is hereby placed into an investment account with the firm of Rogers, Salin and Flagg. Further, in accordance with your father's wishes, your inheritance consists of the income generated by said estate, payable to you in an annual sum for the first 5 years following his death. Upon the 5th anniversary of his demise, the entire estate passes to you. Of course, it was your father's wish that you leave the bulk of the inheritance invested and adjust your lifestyle to living off the income alone. That, however, is your choice 5 years from now. It was signed by the partner named Flagg. I looked at the date on the letterhead. Dolly would have come into her full inheritance 3 months from now. A chance comment came back to me. She'd told Archie she had the money for something. I didn't know what they were talking about at the time. A brokerage statement included in the packet showed an account balance of well over £2 million. You can afford a lot of nice little somethings with that kind of cash. A more important question came to mind. I turned through the stapled pages of the actual trust document. It was written in typical triplicate legalese wording, but I was looking for one thing, and I found it. Upon the death of the beneficiary, the estate would pass to the beneficiary's legal next of kin, her spouse. If she was unmarried at the time of her death and had no children, the estate would pass to the Royal Society of Orchid Growers. Here surely was Archie's motive. Chapter 24. I stuffed all the pages back into the brown envelope, pondering. In the days when he held his management job, he probably pulled in about the same income that Dolly got from the interest on her trust. But his losing the job changed the whole picture. Archie could never get divorced from Dolly, that much was clear. And he didn't dare wait until she inherited it all. The Orchid Society might be her father's pet project, but I doubted it was Dolly's. She would have pulled the money from her trust as soon as legally possible, and she would do anything with the money that she wanted, including writing Archie out of her will if he did any little thing to piss her off. Poor passive Archie. I'd often wondered how a man so dynamic in the workplace, with his winning sales team and all the business perks, had become so dominated by his wife. The money was probably the answer. But even a docile pet will strike out eventually, and perhaps Archie had reached the breaking point. In love with another woman, knowing that in a few months Dolly had the power to cut him off financially, living with the knowledge of the severe penalty for divorcing her. The only solution, it seemed, was to get rid of her. I started back at the box of papers. Afternoon sun came through the room's one window, the square of brilliance hitting the brown envelope. I could say that I saw the light, but that would be way too corny. I only knew I had to get this information to someone in authority. The sensible legal thing to do would be to copy down the name of the law firm in London and put them in touch with the police. But sometimes sensible and legal are a little too iffy, and way too slow for me. Archie wasn't going to look through every item in the house. He was moving, things would be in a mess for a while. I grabbed the trust documents out of the brown envelope, folded and stuffed them into the side pocket of my jacket. The apartment door opened. Yikes! I pulled some random papers from one of the other files and stuffed them in the envelope as replacements, jammed the packet back where I'd found it, and used the roll of packing tape I'd brought with me to seal both boxes shut. By the time Archie entered the bedroom, I'd stacked the two boxes by the wall, making a show of brushing dust from my hands. "These look like memorabilia, so I just taped them up," I said, and stared into the open closet. "I was wondering if you had plans for Dolly's clothing, or if I should just bag it up for charity." He gave me a firm stare, and I hoped my guilt, or the bulge in my jacket, didn't show. "Oh, sure, charity is fine." "Do you want to go through the items yourself?" I asked, adding as much sympathy in my tone of voice as I could muster. "No, it's all right. I wouldn't know what to do with them." He walked over to the nightstand where he'd left his wallet. He gave me one glance, thumbed through the cash, and apparently satisfied that all was intact, started for the door. "Need to reimburse Gabrielle for the lunch she brought me." I transferred the legal papers and Dolly's journal to my purse and looked around the room for any other evidence of my intrusion. Although my inclination was to run and run fast, some sense of obligation told me that having promised Archie I would bag up Dolly's clothing, I should stick with the job. I found plastic trash bags in the broom closet and hastily emptied drawers of lingerie and sweaters, then pulled the hanging garments from the closet and bagged those as well. I didn't touch the collection of costume jewelry, but I did put the cosmetics and creams from the bathroom into the trash. Duty completed, and having a reasonable amount of work to show for the time I'd spent in the apartment, I went back down to the shop. The stockroom looked like a tornado had passed through. The large work table in the middle was littered with boxes, mostly empty, and the shelves contained only the ragged remnants of unsold merchandise, things Gabrielle must have taken from the displays and stashed here for lack of anything better to do with them. The tea kettle sat, cold and unplugged, on the short counter where Dolly always kept it, along with several utilitarian mugs. She'd apparently learned to leave the good china upstairs. Voices came up the stairwell from the cellar, the one-word commands of the moving boss and the responding grunts of his helpers. I could hear Archie's voice, nearer, and Gabrielle responded from somewhere farther away down there. I wandered into the sales room. Outside, the lane was filled with pedestrians, people getting their shopping done before end of day. A normal day in a normal enough setting. The moving van sat at the curb, partially filled. Catherine Devon passed the window and came inside, wearing a rich bronze-toned dress that set off her blonde hair amazingly, with a long coat in a geometric print, heavy gold jewelry, and pumps that had to be dyed to match. Her smile perked up when she saw me. Or was she merely flashing that confident look of a woman who knows she has just outdressed you by miles? I knew my jeans and jacket must be dusty, but I refused to look. Archie walked into the shop, over to the register. I busied myself restacking the boxes I'd earlier placed at the edge of the room, pretending to make space for more. I'd not seen the two lovers interact all that much, so it was interesting to blatantly spy a little bit. From the cellar below, the working men voices grew louder as the movers apparently wrestled with those large pieces. Catherine walked straight to Archie, and as she spoke quietly to him, I saw her run her long fingers down the sleeve of his plaid shirt. Their eyes met, but he quickly averted his, instinctively checking the rest of the room. He spotted me and went back to bagging up the money from the till. Gabrielle came in from the stockroom, made an impatient sound, and I saw that she was wrestling with a large garbage bag. She got it tied shut and dragged it toward the door. "Looks like everything will soon be gone," I said, realizing that Archie had looked up with a what-can-I-do-for-you stare. He put on his grief face again. Even with what I knew of Dolly's inheritance, I couldn't be sure of his emotional state. I'd seen cases where a spouse who seemingly couldn't stand the other, brink of divorce and all that, suddenly went into deep anguish upon the death of the partner. Belated remorse, guilt. Maybe that's what was happening here. Of course, it was entirely possible that Archie was doing a great job of selling the act. He'd been a salesman for a lot of years. Catherine had stepped back a little, maintaining a proper distance, but her eyes went often to Archie's face, and I realized that she genuinely cared for him. My thoughts vacillated back and forth. Cold-blooded killers or star-crossed lovers?
"Coming through, please,"
a burly man's voice called out. Two men appeared at the stockroom door, awkwardly balancing the big leather sofa, the one I'd napped on during the very long night when Louisa and I had stayed here on our ghost hunt. I tucked myself against the wall. Gabrielle was at the door, returning from taking the trash bag somewhere, and she held it open for them, using one hand to dampen the sound of the little bells. As the sofa passed through, she gave the back of it a stroke with one hand, admiring the soft leather. "Well, I'd best be off," Catherine said. Her tone was bright, but her eyes were on the dust motes floating in the air in the wake of the sofa. I imagined that she didn't want her expensive clothing to get dirty. She tapped her index finger twice on the counter near Archie's arm, a private little goodbye. There wasn't much point in staying subtle now. The wife was gone, and everyone in the room quite easily picked up on the nuances. I returned the pleasant smile she sent my direction as she walked out the door.
"You're about finished then, Gabrielle?"
Archie asked.
"Thompson should be by soon to take the fixtures. That's about all for the shop. I'll need you to turn your key back."
The younger woman looked around, but it seemed her duties were done. She reached into her jeans pocket and extracted a key ring, from which she worked one key loose. She stepped behind the sales counter and placed it there. Then she reached out to give Archie a hug. "I'll miss you," she said with a glance toward me. "And the shop and the customers, of course." He patted her back, tried to extricate himself, succumbed to a longer hug. About the time he was going to physically pry her arms off him, she broke away.
"Well then,
stay in touch. I'll make you dinner any time, you know. I caught the wistfulness in her voice. When he rounded the counter, creating a barrier between them, she didn't have much choice but to leave. The moving men clumped back into the shop.
"It'll require 2 days, sir,"
the senior guy said.
"That cellar's plumb full, heavy stuff, and the stairs."
Archie didn't look happy with the verdict, but didn't have much choice about accepting it. The day was getting late. I realized Louisa would probably be getting off work soon. I made a token gesture to help some more, but he wished me goodbye, and I headed toward the Nutshell pub to meet my aunt. We had agreed we should have a drink there on this, my final evening in Barry. The lights were still on in that electronics store where I'd listened to Archie's message tape, and a neon sign in the window said, "Copies." Without thinking twice, I ducked in and used the self-service machine to copy all the documents I'd taken from the Jones apartment. Depending on my next conversation with Archie, I better be ready to turn these over to the police in the morning. Stuffing all the pages into my purse, I set out once more and came to the tiny pub, where I spotted Louisa standing outside. We squeezed onto one of the 2 built-in corner benches in the cramped area, which surely couldn't be more than 100 square feet total, with close to 20 people filling this space and spilling out the open door. Once I got past the mummified cat that hung from the ceiling and the various other heads of dead creatures adorning the walls, the place did hold a certain charm. Louisa caught me eyeing the cat. "I was just remembering what you told us about the cats being entombed in the walls. I wonder if a mummified cat will only catch mummified mice." I glanced up at the stiff carcass again and found myself casually draping my hand over the top of my wine glass, just in case of drifting skin cells or something. She chuckled. "The collection in here was once far more extensive. The health department made them clear out a lot of it." Reassuring. 2 young guys in black t-shirts manned the bar, and the crowd was a lively one. With no possible way to have a private conversation, the banter merely bounced around the narrow room, and anyone who wanted could join in. A girl who barely made the legal drinking age flirted outrageously with a slick guy in a leather jacket. He dropped F-bombs liberally as he regaled the crowd with a tale of how he'd managed to elude the police on his motorcycle after a little altercation at an intersection in Stowmarket. Between his exaggerated accent and the hip slang, I probably got only half of that right. We finished our wine, set the glasses on the bar, and edged through the crowd out to the sidewalk. The close little neighborhood hid any true view of sunset as I'm accustomed to it in the wide open spaces of New Mexico. This was more like a gradual dimming of the light. "I know a charming, very out-of-the-way place where they serve a hearty dinner if you'd like. We'll go past St. Mary's, then it's just a short way," Louisa said. After my investigative afternoon, my head becoming crowded with way too much information, followed by the noise inside the Nutshell, the quiet street provided a nice respite. I gave myself over to simply enjoying the historic buildings, the hanging flower baskets under soft street lamps, and the relative silence now that workers were closing up shop and heading home for the night. Over a nice cut of beef with mashed potatoes and steamed vegetables, I told Louisa about my findings from my visit to the news office, to the subtle glances I'd caught between Archie and Catherine. "I'm afraid to admit that I did a little pilfering, too." I held up Dolly's journal and told her about the trust fund. "I keep going back and forth, wondering if Dolly's overpossessiveness is all that's behind her writings and the things that were happening in her shop. Or did she genuinely have something to worry about? With an inheritance of over £2 million coming to her, maybe she really did have a reason to be worried." Louisa sipped at her wine. "I also have to admit to making copies of the documents, in case the police need evidence. But they don't even believe there was a crime. I don't know what to think." Louisa's blue eyes looked sad. "And now you're leaving tomorrow. I wish you could stay longer." I had the feeling that she'd come to enjoy having someone else around the house, a pal to do things with. I felt a little sadness, too. "Well, I will just have to come back, or you'll have to come to Albuquerque. The house is certainly big enough to accommodate a guest for a while." "Yes, Without your father it would. She gave a tight little smile. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a type of regret for events past, even though I'd not even been born when it all happened. There seemed to be so much still unsaid. My mouth opened and then shut again. Louisa drained the last of her wine and put on a bright smile. Let's don't allow your final evening to be a downer in any way, okay? I nodded. Our server came up behind me, and before I quite knew what was happening, had delivered the check into Louisa's graspy hand. We did a little haggle over who should pay. I still felt that she had saved me a fortune in hotel costs. But she had her money out, and I acquiesced. Treating me to the nice dinner seemed like something she genuinely wanted to do. Come on then, let's get on home. I've bought another of those Battenberg cakes you loved so much. We'll make a cup of tea. We walked out into the quiet evening. A lone bird called out somewhere, and in the far distance the sound of traffic drifted over from the A14. But the neighborhood streets were nearly silent now at the dinner hour. I have to admit that I'm feeling a bit guilty now about taking Dolly's papers, particularly the journal, I said as we crossed the street. Even though Archie might not want to know what she wrote in there, the book itself belongs among her things. Truly, even if he might have been behind her death? I raised an eyebrow. Well, I did make the copies. She chuckled. Why don't you go ahead and start the tea? I'll pop over to the shop. Archie will either be upstairs or he'll still be working at packing up. If I don't see him, I'll just drop it through the mail slot. That way you and I have all day tomorrow to have fun and make the drive to London. It's quicker if you cut along the path beside the church. If you aren't afraid of the graveside's residents. Her lopsided grin made the suggestion into a dare. Me? I ain't afraid of no ghosts. I turned right, humming the Ghostbusters theme song while she continued to the left and home. Chapter 25. The path beside the heavy old Gothic church was quiet and deserted. Ahead, a lone street lamp glowed, but it seemed far in the distance. I pulled my blazer tightly against the damp and picked up my stride. To either side of me, drops of dampness hung on the thick grass. The old gravestones were black chunks rising from silvered lawns. That theme song wouldn't leave me alone, even though I made a conscious effort to switch to something less vivid, a classic waltz, perhaps. Ahead, mist swirled around that distant street lamp. Okay, Charlie, this is just way too movie set freaky. I tried humming an old Creedence Clearwater tune, but the notes came out reedy, and the weak sound just bounced off the stone walls around me, making it seem that voices were coming from all sides. I quickened my pace, but refused to break into an all-out run. Finally, it felt like 4 hours later, I passed under the street lamp, and the cross street was visible on the other side. I knew where I was. 1 block over and 3 up, and I would be at the shop. At the next intersection, cars were driving along in perfectly normal fashion, and laughter from a pub came out along with a bright square of light that hit the sidewalk. See, silly, there was nothing to worry about. Without the carved wood sign above the door, I didn't immediately spot the knit and pearl, but then I realized the moving van still sat there, all closed up and dark. The men must have quit for the day, but left the truck, rather than taking a chance that their prime parking spot would be gone in the morning. The shop itself was dark except for a light coming from the stockroom. A shadow crossed the rectangular doorway. Archie must be working in there. I glanced toward the mail slot in the other door, the one that led up to the apartment. It would be simple enough to drop the diary and the legal papers through the slot and not have to admit that I'd taken them. But what if Archie were not the one to find them? What if he didn't check there before completely vacating the premises and someone else came across them? They contained information far too sensitive and personal to leave to chance like that. I tried the door to the shop, but it was locked. I tapped at the window twice. Finally, Archie peered from the stockroom, a silhouette against the golden light. I pressed my face near the glass so he could see who was there.
Charlie, what is it?
He said when he opened the shop door to me. He'd forgotten to remove the dangling string of bells, and they tinkled just as happily as in the days when customers came in. "I need to talk to you." The store's fixtures were gone, leaving the small room feeling cavernous and hollow. Without the sales counter or display shelves, the only signs of the former shop were the dust balls and a few random bits of trash. The boxed files and office supplies sat near the door to the stock room. He ushered me forward.
"I've been clearing up the last of the things in there. Once the buyer came and took the fixtures away. It seems quite barren in here, doesn't it?"
I followed him to the back room, where it appeared he'd made quite a bit of progress. A few boxes were stacked against the wall, and the metal shelving was dismantled now. The large work table in the middle of the room still held a ton of clutter. He looked oddly relaxed, completely businesslike. I still had a hard time picturing him grinding up pills and putting them in Dolly's food. He seemed like a man quietly going through the motions of adapting to a new life. "Archie?" I cleared my throat and wondered if this was the best approach. "I know about the affair." He looked up from a box he just taped shut, his bland expression giving away nothing. "You and Catherine Devon. Dolly suspected it for a long time." I held up the journal. He gave it a cursory glance, as if he'd never seen it before.
"I don't know."
"You do know what I'm talking about."
"Actually, Miss Parker, I was about to say that I don't know that I want to discuss this with you."
"Fair enough. You don't owe me an explanation." I set the journal on the work table. "But you did ask me to look into Dolly's death because you didn't think she purposely took those pills."
"And I still don't believe that."
"But don't you see? If the police were to look into it, wouldn't you be the most likely suspect?" I lifted the sheaf of legal papers. "You certainly have the most to gain from your wife's death."
"What have you got there?"
"Archie, surely you've seen this. Dolly's father's trust. He left her quite a lot of money. I tracked it down after hearing Nigel Trehorn's message on your answering machine." I took the microtape out of my purse and set it with the journal. "I'm sorry that I took these things from your apartment, but I was following your I swore I heard the bells at the front door. Archie must not have locked it after I came in." I stepped to the doorway and peeked out, only to find myself face to face with Gabrielle. Her eyes went wide, matching my own, I felt sure. "You too?" she said. "What?" I backed into the storeroom and bumped into the table. "What are you doing here with him?" Her peach complexion was now suffused with blotches of red, her eyes wild. I have to admit that I barely saw it coming. She advanced on me, picking up one of the steel cross pieces from the metal shelves Archie had disassembled. She grasped the thing like a baseball bat and swung it at me. I stumbled around the work table, backing away from her wild movements. The cellar door stood open, and she drove me toward it. My foot went off the edge of the uneven stone landing. I felt myself cartwheeling into space. Everything went black. A hazy roar sounded in my ears, like the steady pounding of surf on a windy day. My eyes tried to open but felt heavy and dysfunctional. One lid raised partially, my vision blurred. It closed again. I gave in to the feeling, succumbing to the desire to sleep. Voices intruded, one male and one female, but I couldn't make out the words. The roar in my ears kept intruding. Everything felt cold and rough and painful. I rested again, but something deep inside me warned me not to allow myself the luxury of a real slumber. I stretched the fingers of my right hand, felt a hard surface like concrete. It was cold to the touch, and I began to realize that my whole body ached with it. I squeezed my eyes tight, trying to work up enough moisture to open them. When I finally peered out through a web of lashes, all I could see was a nondescript expanse of gray, heavy shadows, large, unfamiliar objects. I blinked again and worked to make the other eye open. A ghostly image moved in the distance, but when I got both eyes to focus on it, I realized it was a foot in a smooth leather shoe. "Ready, my darling?" said the female voice. A mumbled response in deeper tones told me that the man had replied, but I couldn't understand his words. My hearing remained muffled. I wanted to shake myself like a dog, rid myself of the hurts and the fuzziness. "Soon. I shall. Soon." The words faded in and out, but the voice was vaguely familiar. Gabrielle. Footsteps sounded crisply, tap, 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 across the floor. Then a more uneven pace. I tried to turn my head to see where they went, but the tiniest motion sent excruciating pain and a wave of nausea through me. A thump, somewhere above me. I closed my eyes again. "Miss Parker?" A small touch on my shoulder woke me. "Miss Parker, wake up. Are you all right?" Do I look all right? Something inside me told me that I must be fine if I could conjure up that thought. I wiggled my fingers again, brought my right hand up to my face. It came away bloody. "Miss Parker, it's Archie Jones. Please wake up." I must have drifted off again for a second there. "Okay, Charlie, you have to get moving." I rolled over to my back and stretched my legs out. I must have been lying on my left side, fetal position, for quite a while. The bones felt like they'd flattened to the shape of the floor. "Where?" "We're in the cellar, at the shop." I raised my hands to my face, taking a little inventory, noting that some kind of gash at my right temple seemed to be the cause of the blood. I groaned, rolled over, pushed myself into a sitting position. Kept my eyes closed, head in hands, against the vertigo. In a moment, I felt like I could open them. Archie knelt beside me, clearly having no clue what to do. He looked a little gray in the face, but otherwise unharmed. I imagined his wan expression came from looking at me. "What happened?" He looked a little discomfited. "Gabrielle pushed you." I remembered. "We were in the shop." "Yes, you fell down the steps." "And you really came to my rescue there, didn't you, He-Man?" I didn't say it. I shifted my weight a little. My lower back hurt like hell. Breathing was agony around my ribcage. I could see where my jeans were ripped across one knee, and the left sleeve of my blazer was barely hanging by a few threads. I looked over toward the stone steps leading up to the shop. It was a wonder Gabrielle hadn't killed me. "Give me a hand." I worked to get my legs under me. Archie helped pull me to my feet. A blade of pain ripped through my left hip when I put my weight on it. "Where is she now?" He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped at a tiny smear of blood on his hand. "She's gone. Said she was getting something ready and she would be back soon." I limped over to a chest of drawers that movers hadn't taken away yet and leaned on it for support. "Archie, what the hell is going on here? Why did Gabrielle come after me?" But my question fell on deaf ears. He'd already crossed to the far wall and turned to pace the distance again. "I'm so worried for Catherine." "Catherine?" "Gabrielle just seems so very determined." I didn't know what strange little games this bunch were playing, but I knew I wanted out of there. Now. I looked toward the stairs, calculating whether I could possibly climb them. "It's no use," Archie said, guessing my thoughts. "She's locked it from the other side." "You don't have a key?" "She took them." Once again I cursed his passivity. How could he sit back and just let himself become a victim, let alone stand for what Gabrielle had done to me? I glanced at my watch, but it was smashed. Surely Louisa would get worried when I didn't come home, and she would come to check on me. And find what? There was no way she could know we were in the cellar. At least she might contact the police and tell them I was missing. I clung to that hope. "Is there an opening from the street down to this cellar?" I asked Archie. "You know the type, where businesses receive deliveries?" I knew the answer to that almost as soon as I'd phrased the question. Louise and I had spent the night down here and examined every nook and cranny for traces of the unexplained haunting. There was no delivery chute. "What time is it?" Archie pushed up the sleeve of his cardigan, but his arm was bare. "I guess I left my watch in the apartment." "Well, fine. I was back to hoping that enough time had gone by for Louisa to get worried about me. I tested my legs to see if I could walk. Each step sent a jolt through my left leg, and each breath was agony. I could probably get up the stairs in a life-or-death move, but it would be foolish to waste the energy to go up there to find that the door was locked, and then have to make the painful journey back down. I needed to think this out before I exhausted my small reserve of energy. "Have you checked the door? Maybe she closed it but forgot to lock it." He shook his head. "It's locked." "Is my purse down here?" Archie turned his head, glancing around. "Can you look for it? I might have something in there that could help us." He moved around the room, finally spotting it beside the steps. He picked it up in that uneasy way that most men carry a woman's purse and brought it to me. I spied a chair in the corner. I wasn't all that sure I could get back up from its overstuffed depths once I sat, but standing around wasn't helping my hip at all either. Limping over to it, I sank down into the cushion and allowed myself to simply melt. It was the only scrap of comfort I'd felt yet. My bag sported a few new scuffs, and when I unzipped the top, I was greeted by the heavenly scent of the bottle of eucalyptus lotion I carried with me. The plastic cap had split, and nearly everything in the purse wore a coat of it. Would this night just keep getting better and better? I scraped enough of the silky stuff off my small bottle of ibuprofen to get it open and wiped the spare lotion onto my skin. Tapped 4 of the little brown pills into the palm of my hand. "Is there any water down here?" My luck, it would be a bottle that one of the sweaty movers had left behind, but I could hardly afford to be picky. Archie dithered around some more, but didn't come up with anything. I worked up as much spit as I could and worked the pills down. A dozen swallows or so, and they felt like they might actually make it to my stomach. While hoping for some result from the pain meds, I continued my trek through the purse. One of Dolly's knitted afghans lay over the back of my chair, and I used it to wipe lotion off each item that I pulled from the purse. I wanted to feel badly about messing up her handiwork, but I was at that screw-it-all point in the evening where my own comfort was selfishly taking precedence over everything else. I tried to remember what the doorknob at the top of the stairs looked like. When I'd been here with Louisa, we just left the door standing open. As near as I could remember, it was secured with a rather old-fashioned lock that might easily be circumvented with a piece of plastic. I pulled a credit card that I rarely used out of my wallet and handed it to Archie. "Go up and see if this will work." He gave it a blank look, and I explained in detail how to do it. What planet had this man grown up on?
"Sorry, I didn't have much call for this skill as a manager of a sales team,"
he said as he trudged up the steps. I heard a lot of fiddling around and a few grunts, no reassuring squeak of the door coming open.
"It's the other lock that seems to be the sticking point,"
he said, coming back down and handing me the card. "There's a deadbolt on it?" I hadn't remembered that part.
"Well, yes, apparently so."
Sheesh. I gritted my teeth and resumed the search through the purse. If only I'd thought to pack my hammer and chisel, we could have tried digging our way out through that old bricked-up doorway into the tunnels, and end up God knows where. A better use would be to remove the hinges from the door, but without the tools, that wasn't happening either. Archie continued to stand there and watch me rummage. "You might check around and see if there is anything in this cellar in the way of tools. Maybe the movers left a hammer or something behind?" Did a girl have to think of everything around here?
"Oh, here's something that might,"
he called out after a few minutes. He held up a pair of office scissors. I wanted to cry when he handed them to me. How on earth were those going to open a locked door? I set them beside me and continued to pull things from the purse. Besides the wallet and pill bottle, I came up with my ring of keys from home, which I sent Archie up the stairs again to try. By some miracle, one of them might work, but no such luck on that. Other than that, it seemed we were reduced to using a hairbrush, a lip balm, a ballpoint pen, or my small spiral notebook. I was just about to consider how the pen and metal coil from the notebook might be disassembled into lock-picking tools when I heard a sound from above. A second later, the door opened. Gabrielle was back. Chapter 26. She closed the door behind her and came lightly down the stairs.
Almost ready, darling. I've been to the market for food, and I've collected my things from home. By tomorrow night, we'll be in a posh hotel room in Paris.
Her eyes were on Archie the whole time she was outlining her plan. Then she noticed that I was up. Her face hardened. I tried to imagine what I must look like. Blood from the cut beside my eye had probably dried in a trickle all the way down to my chin. My hair must be tangled and full of floor grime and dust balls. Same for my clothing, with rips and tears added.
"What do we do with her?"
Gabrielle said to Archie. He gave her a blank stare. "Come on, Arch, speak up for me," I begged silently. But he didn't. "You can just leave me here." Gabrielle didn't seem to notice that I'd spoken. I debated launching myself out of the chair, but I knew that she would move a lot quicker than I possibly could right now.
"Well, no matter. I've only got one more little errand, my love, and then we're off,"
she said, her smile back in place. She pointed toward the ceiling.
"I'll just pack a little bag for you. Your passport's upstairs?"
Without waiting for a response, she whirled around and rushed up the stairs. "Catch her!" I hissed at Archie.
"Hold the door open."
But he didn't react quickly enough, and we heard the deadbolt snap firmly shut. I jammed all my stuff back into my battered purse and edged my way forward on the chair seat, hoping my legs would hold me a bit better now that the pain was subsiding. "What's going on here, Archie? You're planning to run off now with Gabrielle? What about Catherine?" I hobbled toward him and faced him down. "What about it?" His pallid skin faded another 2 shades. I don't know. I never planned this." "Well, Gabrielle seems to think the two of you are going off together, towards some happy life in Paris. Where did she get that idea if you didn't have a hand in the plans?" Upstairs I heard muffled sounds. Archie rolled his eyes up toward them. "Archie, explanation!" He crumpled. His shoulders slumped and he backed into a straight upright chair. "I never thought she would—" I stood in front of him. "Start at the beginning." "I'd hoped to make Dolly give up the idea of this silly shop. I wanted back in our home, be with our friends at the club. I figured if we were back there, close to our old lifestyle, I might get my job back, or at least have the contacts among the country club set to get another good position." "And to stay close to Catherine?" "Well, yes, right." "But Dolly knew about the long-term affair between you two, and she did all she could to keep you here in town. Not that it made much sense to locate her shop in this building, which Catherine Devon owns." "That was the one suggestion of mine that Dolly actually accepted. The location is top-notch and the rent was reasonable. It's not as if Catherine were in the building much time at all anyway." "And the prank started as a way to get Dolly to reconsider moving back to your old house. Were you behind all of them?" "Only a few. I accidentally made the muddy footprints the first time, slipped off my shoes and stowed them away. When Dolly became so upset, it gave me the idea that she might be convinced, with a little persuasion, that the place was haunted. From time to time, I made noises in the night. Whenever she took her sleeping pills, I could sneak downstairs and spray some perfume or make footprints. Back in the bedroom, I would pretend I'd been awakened by a noise, and she would insist that we both go downstairs to investigate. Once I released a tiny smoke bomb, and she became convinced it was an apparition." "You probably fed her a lot of stories of the haunted places around town, adding a little fuel to the fire or something?" He nodded. "But I never did anything to cause her harm, I swear it." "You didn't switch teacups when she scalded her hand?" "No, absolutely not." He looked up at me. I pulled another of the straight chairs over and sat gingerly on it. "How does Gabrielle fit into all of this?" "I began to suspect her of some of the nastier pranks, after one time when she and I, Were you also sleeping with her?" My incredulity began to climb.
she began to come on to me, right after she started working here. Young woman, older man. I know I should have fended her off, but that sort of thing can appeal to a man's self-confidence, you know? By that time, Dolly had ended the physical side of our relationship.
He squirmed as he said it.
And I was barely able to get out and see Catherine. But I swear it was mostly a matter of a few stolen kisses in moments when no one was around.
I watched his face for signs of deception, certain that he was still hiding something.
There was just the once. Down here in the cellar, one evening when Dolly went to a card game with her friends. Gabrielle had worked late, and she asked me to carry something down for her. When I turned round, she was right behind me. Threw herself at me, she did. We ended up on the leather sofa that was here.
Gabrielle had given that sofa a loving stroke with her hand as the movers carried it out. Maybe that small motion brought it home to her that Archie would soon be going away with someone else. I glanced around the cellar. The night Louisa and I had stayed here, I'd taken a short nap on that same sofa. And I'd had a vivid dream about Drake and myself. I blushed. Maybe suggestive scents on the leather or within the fibers of the woven blanket had exerted an effect on me. Ew. I forced myself to follow a different line of thinking. So when did Gabrielle reveal this plan to you? The idea of running off together?
I swear it was never a plan. Not the way you're thinking. She's cooked up the whole thing herself.
I mulled it over. Archie, for all the deceptions he pulled with his wife, had seemed genuinely concerned when Dolly died, and his surprise at Gabrielle's recent actions felt authentic to me. Maybe the clues to the younger woman's state of mind had been there all along.
I don't know. I truly don't know.
Archie murmured, his head in his hands. Upstairs, the few sounds had stopped, I realized with a start. How much time had gone by? Much longer than Gabrielle needed to grab a few clothes for Archie. I gazed again at my watch for several seconds, forgetting that its shattered face wasn't going to tell me anything.
I can't go with her.
Do you think she'll understand that? I didn't see Gabrielle being very sympathetic toward what she would perceive as a change of heart on his part. The girl was obviously thinking that her romantic crush on Archie was reciprocated. She seemed quite firm in her plans. I don't hear anything upstairs, do you? I asked, trying to bring myself back to the more practical matters, like how on earth we would get out of here. Archie raised his head and cocked an ear toward the door. Can you go up there and check? He came back down in less than a minute.
I don't hear anything.
What was it she said before she left? That she had one more small errand to do? Any idea what that might be? He shook his head slowly. He might have been successful in the business world, but I swear that I've never met a man more clueless about women. I'd felt sorry for him, being pushed around by his wife all those years, but I was beginning to see her side of it. If anything was to happen, someone needed to take charge, and Archie was clearly not doing it. Edging forward in my chair again, I decided I better test my own limits, find out how much I might be capable of when the moment of truth arrived. I stood and took a few steps. The sharp jabs earlier had eased into a dull overall ache now, except for my ribs. The first deep breath almost brought me to my knees. I'm going back to the softer chair. Tell me if you hear any sounds from the shop. Anything at all. If someone other than Gabrielle should show up, we need to bang on the door and shout for help. He dutifully climbed to the small landing and stood there with his ear to the door. I used baby steps and an old woman's groan to get me into the depths of the armchair. I tried to calculate how long we'd been down here, but with no idea how long I'd lain unconscious on the floor, there wasn't much way to know. Plus, what did it matter? We were here now. I rested my head against the back of the chair, trying to focus on plots for escape and rescue. At some point, I dozed. I know this because I woke myself with a buzzsaw snore. A trickle of saliva trailed out of the corner of my mouth, and I wiped at it with the grimy sleeve of my blazer. Archie had given up his post at the door and come back down to find a warmer surface than the stone steps. He sat on the edge of a console table, picking at his cuticles. I stood up too fast. My head swam, and every single one of my aches and bruises screamed at me. The ibuprofen's effects had worn off, which meant it had been at least 4 hours since Gabrielle left. What type of quick errand could she possibly be doing? What if she'd had a traffic accident, or been picked up by the police, or simply headed off to France without Archie? We might be down here for 100 years before someone found our skeletons with scary, toothy grins. Stop it, Charlie. Right this instant. For one thing, at least one person had to be looking for me. Louisa. And Catherine would start wondering where Archie was. She had a key to the building. Surely someone would come along. As if by divine response, I heard a small noise upstairs. I sucked in my breath. Ouch. Slowly breathed out again. The doorknob rattled, but of course it was Gabrielle.
"All done,"
she announced gaily. She practically skipped down the stairs and put an arm around Archie.
"We're ready to go."
"I'm not going with you, Gabrielle."
"Of course you are. It's all planned."
He shook his head.
"Darling, all the obstacles are out of our way now. We're free. I've taken care of all of them."
"Them? Gabrielle, what have you done?" She gave me a glare that made me wish I'd just stayed quietly in my corner until they'd gone. She turned back to Archie.
"The car is packed, darling. A few hours to the coast through the channel, and we'll be ready to start our new life."
He shook his head again. She slapped him.
"We are going. We have plans. We'll have a life together, with all of Dolly's money."
Her overly sweet tone had gone rigid and hard.
"You told me I was the love of your life."
"I never."
His mouth hung open.
"I got rid of that possessive wife of yours for you. When we couldn't scare her off, I gave her the pills, and now I've taken care of the other one too."
"Catherine? You've hurt Catherine?"
Pain contorted his face. Gabrielle's eyes sparked with fire.
"It's the two of us now, Archie. You'll not reject me."
She spun toward me.
"What trash have you been telling him?"
Her words came out through clenched teeth. "I have not told him anything, Gabrielle. This is crazy. Just let me go and the two of you can do whatever you want."
"Oh, and have you run him right to the police? No bloody way!"
What did that mean? Did she plan to get rid of everyone who knew what she'd done?
"Come, Archie. We'll go quietly. Leave the place locked up. No one will ever know she's down here."
My mind raced through the possibilities, but if Catherine truly was gone, that didn't leave anyone who could get into the cellar. I really would become a stack of dried-out old bones. I tried to send visual signals to Archie. Get out, call for help, jam the door so she can't lock it. Anything. But he was speaking quietly, trying to reason with her and make everyone play nice again. I pushed past the pain to rush her, thinking maybe I could reach the top of the stairs first, but she elbowed my ribs the moment I got within striking distance, and that took the breath out of me.
"Get over there,"
she said, shoving me backward into the armchair.
"Gabrielle, listen to me. Please don't do it this way. Please listen to reason."
But she was way beyond reason. She grabbed up a heavy silver bookend and advanced on me. I wanted to melt into the chair's depths. I gripped the edges of the seat cushion and my fingers closed around something hard and cold. The scissors. Chapter 27. Her face contorted in anger. Her eyes went wild. I kept my eyes on the hand with the bookend while I tightened my grip on the scissors and tried to think what to do with them. Stab or slice. I didn't want to do either, but I wasn't about to let her clock me in the head with that thing. Movement behind Gabrielle caught my eye. She swung the bookend at me just as Archie reached around her from behind. He tried to pin her arms at her sides, but she saw him at the last millisecond and turned on him. The momentum sent the heavy silver object right toward his face. I jumped up, stumbling when the hip pain hit me, my scissor weapon still in hand. Archie had wrestled Gabrielle to the floor and she dropped the silver bookend, just beyond his grasp. I didn't wait to find out how it would all end. I scrambled for the stairs, wincing with each footfall, holding my breath tightly against the pain in my ribs. At the top, I dared a glance back. Archie had kicked the bookend farther beyond the fray. Gabrielle was trying to punch him with her fists, but he'd grabbed both her wrists. I leaned against the door, half tempted to lock them both inside, but afraid of how that might end up. At the moment, my bigger concern was getting air into my lungs. I managed 2 shallow breaths before I realized that I was hearing a noise from the front of the shop. Someone was pounding on the window. I hobbled to the doorway and almost cried out in relief. It was Louisa, and at the shop's door 2 policemen in nice, solid black uniforms stood with nightsticks in hand. I limped toward the door and let them in. "The cellar!" My breath caught. My ribs were killing me. "Gabrielle, a woman down there. She murdered—" Luckily, they didn't want more from me at that moment. They headed toward the dim light showing from the stairwell. Louisa rushed toward me. "Don't hug." I pointed to my ribs. "Oh, baby, you're a mess." I nodded. She whipped out her cell phone and called for an ambulance. "I was so worried. You didn't come after an hour. Then it was 2 hours. I called the police, but they tried to convince me you'd just gone out for some fun. It took me forever to persuade them that that wasn't the case." I looked around for a place to sit, but the empty shop offered nothing. I leaned against the wall. Voices came from the cellar, shouts followed by a shriek and noises of a struggle. "They searched the park and the graveyard. I tried calling the shop since you told me you were coming here, but the phone's disconnected. I came by, but everything was dark." I nodded. "I had a feeling. Don't try to talk. They'll be here soon." "It's morning." I'd only now realized that the street outside was in daylight and a few cars had passed in front of the shop. Louisa nodded. The unusual sound of a foreign ambulance siren came closer. From below, the male voices grew louder as they approached the top of the steps. One of the police officers had a grip on Gabrielle's elbow. Her hands were in cuffs behind her back. Her perky hair clip was askew and blonde chunks spiked out at all angles. The pale pink sweater and print skirt she'd worn for her going-away trip with Archie were dingy with floor grime, the skirt hanging lopsidedly from a rip near the waistband. She sent me a hard stare before lowering her gaze to the ground as the officer led her outside. Archie's clothing was equally grimy, and he was holding a handkerchief to a scrape near his hairline. The second officer followed. I wondered what was going through his mind.
"Sorry about all this,"
Archie said to me.
"Quite the—"
"What about Catherine?" I interrupted.
"Oh, Lord."
Archie turned to the policeman behind him and started to explain. The ambulance dodged its way around the moving van that still sat there, found a spot in front of it, almost at the curb. 2 uniformed EMTs jumped out and dashed to the back for a stretcher. "I'm all right," I tried to insist. But it became clear that I really should have everything checked out when I tried to walk across the room and nearly fell. Louisa and the policeman each took an elbow, and the paramedics insisted that I sit on the edge of the stretcher while they did quick checks of my blood pressure and heart rate and took a peek at the wound on my temple. I wanted to argue that I could easily ride to the hospital sitting up, but suddenly the soft cushion on the gurney looked really good. I laid down and just gave control over to everyone else, for once. It was mid-afternoon when Louisa took me back to her house. By this time of day, we were supposed to have been arriving in London, settling into our hotel and dressing for dinner and a play. A bunch of strapping around my ribs and a sizable dosing of painkillers had me feeling good enough that I was actually up for it, but Louisa's more sensible argument prevailed, and I was put to bed with chicken soup and a pile of thick blankets. The very proper British doctor had suggested, in his very polite way, that I not travel for a week or so. I had no intention of minding that order. If we go to sleep now, we can set our alarms for 2 a.m. I'll easily make my flight, and you have me out of your hair, I told Louisa. I don't want you out of my hair, darling, she said as she tucked the covers around me. Stay as long as you like. But I could tell that the past day's adventure had worn on her a bit too much as well. When I reached for my bedside clock and set it, she shook her head good-naturedly and went to do the same. My body nestled into the cushiony surface of the mattress, and I must have been asleep within minutes. At some point in my sleep, I heard the distant sound of a telephone ringing, but it could have been a dream. I shifted my position slightly, without ever opening my eyes. Light tapping, a swish of door against carpet, and Louisa's voice whispered, "Charlie?" I smiled under painkiller influence and opened one eye. "Are you awake? Telephone for you." Drake. I'd intended to let him know that everything was on schedule for my flight, but it wasn't my hubby. Archie Jones greeted me.
"Charlie, I wanted to say how sorry I am about your injuries. I'd no idea that Gabrielle would take this thing so far."
"What happened? Is she being held by the police?" A scary flash went through my head, of Gabrielle on the loose and trying to finish what she'd started.
"Oh yes, she'll not be out for a long time. Mainly, I wanted to thank you for your efforts, and say that Catherine is all right."
While I'd been babying my scrapes and cracked ribs, I'd completely forgotten that Gabrielle had gone after Catherine with the intention of fixing her.
Gabrielle apparently went to Catherine's home, but was refused entry by a maid. The police said she then broke into the garage and tampered with something on Catherine's car, but she left enough traces of the handiwork that Catherine became suspicious and had the vehicle towed and checked out before getting behind the wheel. The police took some prints or swabs or whatever it is they do.
I'm glad. Hopefully they got enough evidence to make a strong case.
Well, that's the other thing. Now it seems that Gabrielle has recanted the confession she made to us, and the case will definitely go to trial.
Will I need to come back to testify? At this very moment, the prospect didn't sound at all appealing.
My solicitor believes that my testimony will be sufficient. I'm sure they will let you know.
I nodded and mumbled something. He thanked me again for helping to solve the mystery of the phantom pranks and for getting Gabrielle out of his life. I was dimly aware that Louisa plucked the portable phone from my fingers, but sleep rapidly overtook me. Bless her heart, my aunt continued to watch out for me, packing my bag and carrying it downstairs, making the middle-of-the-night drive without a blink while I filled her in on the strangeness of the previous night. A gingerly hug in consideration of my tender ribs, and an invitation to come back, with the sincere desire that we never let go of our newfound relationship. I'll miss you, darling girl. I hope this whole escapade hasn't put you off England forever. Absolutely not. I love Barry, and I will definitely find a chance to come back. I noticed that her blue eyes seemed a little moist. Louisa, it's been a wonderful adventure, and I wouldn't have given up the time with you for anything. She gave my hand a squeeze and then saw me through the airport check-in and made sure an attendant with a wheelchair would take me to the plane. It wasn't the first time I'd ever boarded a plane in wounded condition, but I chafed a little less at all the fuss. More of the pain pills, my business class seat fully reclined, and I have to admit that Dallas came along more quickly than I would have imagined. During the layover for the quick hop to Albuquerque, I called Drake. Hearing that I was now west of the Mississippi gave both of us a sense of reassurance. I guess you have to live in the West to really know the feeling.
My job is ending tonight. I'll be home tomorrow.
He sounded excited that more Alaska work for the summer looked like a sure bet.
I left the business card for the boarding kennel on the dining table. I hate to admit how much I've missed that little pup. Have Freckles home with you when I get there?
I agreed. I also didn't go into detail about my last 24 hours. There would be time enough for him to learn about it once we were all home, safe and sound. Author's notes. The first seed of the idea for this book came during a trip to Bury St. Edmunds, where the people are so friendly and the history just a little mind-boggling to an American like me. The Angel Hotel is an amazing place to stay. I have my daughter to thank for letting me tag along and for introducing me to the lovely people she works with in Bury. Readers familiar with the location will recognize some real sights: the Angel Hotel, the Sugar Factory, Abbygate Street, and of course the Abbey ruins, gardens, and cathedral. Certain actual businesses are used, but the ones central to the story, the Trehorn Building, the Knit and Pearl, and several others, are purely fictional. All the events of the story are fictional. The police station, newspaper office, museum, and other real places have been altered to my pen to serve the purposes of this fictional story. I do not know if Louisa's haunted sites tours exist. If so, they probably do not resemble the one I made up for this story. But the ghosts mentioned by name do come from local lore, and most certainly do exist, for those who believe. As always, I am thankful for my husband Dan, who has stuck with all the ups and downs of my writing career, through 18 books over the last 22 years. My longtime friend and editor, Susan Slater, is there for my impossible deadlines and always comes through in a pinch. My dear friend Margaret Norrie was very kind in reading the early manuscript and giving me the British perspective on the characters and story. My everlasting thanks to her for pointing out the things that an English person would never do. I saved those bits for my uncouth American characters. And of course, there are my readers, many of whom take the time to send me encouraging notes and to so considerately spread the word by recommending my books to their friends. My heartfelt thanks to all of you. Connie Shelton, May 2012. This concludes Phantoms Can Be Murder by Connie Shelton. This novel is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. If you would like to receive our online newsletter listing new releases, simply go to booksinmotion.com and register with your email address. Newsletter members receive special discounts and freebies. No purchase necessary. That's one word, booksinmotion.com. From Books in Motion, this is Rebecca Cook. Thanks for listening.